This is part 12 of the Craftsman 6-inch joiner rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 11, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we'll be assembling the motor. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. In the description section below the video, there's a link for the owner's manual with this parts diagram and a link for this wiring diagram that I made. And to make things easier on me, you'll notice on the left here, I've already got all of the parts laid out by size. I've got the wiring diagram up top, and then the bigger version of the parts diagram and all the parts. So the first thing we're going to need to do is soak these felt rings in oil, and this is 5W30. We're going to let that soak while we work on some other stuff. So we're going to install the air cone in the other end frame. And we'll just line it up and then screw it down. And if you saw that big pile of screws that I had from the entire joiner, all those small parts, breaking them all down into their sizes and laying them out was a heck of a lot easier than trying to dig through a pile. So now that we've got the air cone installed, we're now on the other end, which is the terminal end frame, and we're going to be installing the terminal bar. So I'm just going to set it in here for now. That's how it's going to go in there. So we've got two of these paper washers that are like an insulator, and then the screws that we're installing it with. A lot of times when I take these motors apart, at least one, if not more, of these paper insulators are missing. I don't think they're super important. I've installed or rebuilt plenty of motors without using any of them, so it's not the end of the world if you don't have them. If you do, use them. Great. So we'll just install that terminal bar. And then we're going to install the Klixon overload protection switch. And I'm just trying to figure out how I'm going to route those wires. The goal here with all of this wiring is we want to keep the center of this end frame free of wires. So we want those wires to run around the edges of it. And again, it gets two screws. And then we'll just start routing some of these wires coming off of the stator. We'll worry about hooking them up a little later. Now we're going to assemble and then install the switch assembly. So you have your switch, you have the insulation, and then that metal plate is the shield. And then we've got two screws and just one of those paper insulator washer things. So like I said, almost always I'm short one or two. And once we've got those two screws started, then we can go ahead and line it up and install it. Once we've got it screwed down, then we can route the two wires coming off of it how we need to route them. So at this point, all of the wires on that one end of the stator one of the wires coming off of the switch assembly and one of the wires coming off of the Klixon overload protector need to come through the terminal door, because they're all going to get installed onto the terminal bar. And if you get confused about what wires, just look at the part or the wiring diagram that I have linked in the description of the video. That should leave 4 wires that are coming out the bottom. The way that the motor is sitting here, the bottom is facing me. And then we're going to rotate it to the 3 o'clock position. So these are the connections we're going to be making on the terminal bar. That's a total of 5 wires. So really just pick one and get going. I'm going to grab that yellow since this is shortest. So basically all I'm going to do here is cut, strip, and then put a ring terminal on each one of these wires. And then heat shrink them. We'll do that for every one of these wires. And then they're all going to go onto those 2 positions on the terminal bar. Now most of your half horsepower 17, 25 and 1750 RPM motors, very similar to this design, are reversible. So I'm assuming this one is reversible as well, but it probably states that in the owner's manual that's linked in the description section below. But I'm not reversing this motor. I'm keeping it wired exactly like it was. And you can imagine what it would have been like to try all this with the original wiring on that stator that we replaced in the previous video, how stiff that wiring was, and you know, the chances of it getting a break and shorting out, extremely high. So I don't always rewire the stator like I did in the previous video. I only do that if that wiring is super stiff and I'm afraid it's going to break, which is about half of the motors of this vintage that I rebuild. The other half of them, the wiring is fine. So next we're going to go ahead and install the 2 springs on the governor that's on the rotor. We took them off when we disassembled everything, so we're just installing them there. And then we're going to put the rotor inside the motor with the governor facing down. Next, we're going to install the other end frame, and notice across one side of it, there's all of these vent holes. That's the bottom of that end frame. If you look in the parts diagram here, you can see the vent holes are on the bottom of the end frames. So I've got the motor positioned so that the bottom is facing the bottom of the screen. So that's how we're lining this up. And you've also got these 3 protrusions on top of the end frame that help you line it up. And we're just lining up the end frames on the stator so that these long through bolts, or through bolts, long screws, whatever you want to call them, can pass all the way through. There's cutouts in the stator for them to pass. And we're going to just tighten them down enough to hold the motor together. We're not tightening them down super tight. So on these bearings, they've got an extended inner race, and that inner race needs to face into the motor. So here we are on the terminal end first, and we're going to just pop that bearing in there. And it should rest below the milled surface there. So if you remember, the original end cap gaskets were in real bad shape. I cut these out on my vinyl cutter out of gasket material. Now it's time to go ahead and remove the felt from that 5W30 we had it soaking in. And we're just going to kind of get some of that oil out of them. We'll put the end cap on. So we've got the gasket, well, we've got the bearing, the gasket, now we got the end cap, and now we got the felt. And then we have the felt retainer. And I'm just lining it up with the wording so that, you know, the bottom of this motor is still facing towards the bottom of the screen. And I'm just using a punch to align up all those parts so that the screws will fit in there. Then we'll screw it down. Then we'll flip the motor over. And this side is basically the exact same thing, except we have the addition of the spring washers. So we just want to make sure that motor's turning freely. Make sure the extended race is facing into the motor. And in this instance, we're going to have to help it in there. We can use that mallet, and then probably going to have to use a cheater tube. I'm just going to rest this on that inner race, smack it with the mallet, and that'll seat that bearing below the reset or the milled surface. Then we've got our two spring washers. Then we've got the end cap gasket, again, another one that I made. We've got the end cap. We've got the felt. And then the felt retainer. We use another punch to line those holes. Then we can screw all that down. So at this point, that rotor should be turning freely in there, resting on the bearings. Like so. Alright, so we've got a grommet that we're going to install into the base that the power cord is going to go through. And then we need to prepare the power cord. So I'm going to strip back the insulation on this about 8 inches. So that's about 6, and we'll go another 2 inches or so. Then cut away that insulation. We'll go ahead and route that power cord through the grommet. Then we're going to install a hog ring on the power cord itself. This will act as a wire stress relief and keep us from pulling the wiring out of the motor. If it gets snagged on something, it won't go past that grommet. Next, we're going to go ahead and install the data panel for the motor on the stator band. Notice the orientation that I have it. I say that because I've installed them upside down before. So Craftsman logo goes towards the center of the stator band. And I'm going to get a board to help level this out. There we go. So I'm installing this with some eyelets. These are, I think, 3/16 inch eyelets. I don't remember now. But I like the way they look. Looks kind of factory when it's all said and done. Not bad. So we'll just go ahead and start bending that stator band. It was originally bent, but we straightened it out when we cleaned it up. And then we're going to straighten out some of the end clips on the ends of it to make it assembling easier. So now we're going to go ahead and install that stator band. So the way I've got this motor sitting right now, the terminal end is to the left. And when it's all said and done, I want the motor data panel on the side of the stator where the switch is going to be. If that made any sense. So we'll just get those ends to loop over each other and then pull them up onto that lip on the end frame, like so. Now we need to align all that. So there's a little gap, about 1/8 of an inch on each side of the stator band before it meets up with the base. And that's what I was aligning there. And then we'll smack down those bent connections with that brass hammer. And then we can install the base. So we'll go ahead and get that first screw in there. And for the second screw, this is where we're going to ground the motor. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the ground coming off of the power cord and strip it and put a ring terminal on there, but it's big enough that the screw can pass through. Shrink wrap, heat shrink that. There I go again with that shrink wrap. And then install that other screw. Then we can tighten both of those screws down. And this motor will be grounded. Ta-da! Pull that power cord back through to the hog loop. And now we're going to go ahead and make the rest of these wire connections. So again, just look at that wiring diagram that's linked in the description of the video. And some of these wires are going to get these blade terminals, like this white wire that goes to the capacitor. And then this is a power cord white wire. This gets connected to the white coming off of the power cord. So it's going to get a blade terminal, and then the power cord itself gets the male end of the blade terminal. We'll go ahead and connect that. Get that out of the way. Then we've got the switch. So we'll go ahead and start lining it up and then making those connections. So we got a white wire going to the switch. These connections are going to be soldered. Go ahead and stick it through that terminal on the switch. And I'm going to get a board to rest that on. And then we'll go ahead and solder that. So as I said, I'm not an electrician, so my soldering is sloppy. And if you're feeling real froggy, you can go ahead and slip some heat shrink on each one of those wires before you solder them, and then you can slide it down over that connection and shrink it down on that. But yeah, so then we go ahead and install the switch, get the wiring all routed the way we want it, and then we can put the switch panel on. And then the screw that holds all that in place. We'll tighten that down with a wrench. Good to go. So back to the bottom of the motor. So we've already got one of these blade terminals done for the capacitor. We just need to do the other one. And we connect up the capacitor, put it back in that cardboard sheath, route those wires, and then we can install the capacitor cover. And I don't like that this doesn't cover the entire bottom. Some of these do. They've actually got, I think, 3 different designs for these covers. And it's just a piece of sheet metal. I mean, I could have fabricated something better, but it is what it is. Now we're going to go ahead and tighten down these through bolts. Once we've got those tightened down, make sure that the rotor still spins freely. And then we'll put the terminal cover on. And I mentioned making sure that the rotor spins freely because the next step is to test this motor. So when we rotate it, I did this off camera, and when we set it back on the bench, just make sure that that rotor is spinning freely. If it's not, then you're going to need to make some adjustments. We go ahead and plug it in. The motor is currently turned off. That plug strip is turned on. And then we're just going to make sure that we're not getting anything out of there. And then we'll flip the switch and then flip the switch on the plug switch. Boom. Motor's running. No sparks. No smoke. Turn it off. Make sure we can hear the click of the governor disengaging. And boom, we're done. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe. Don't forget all the helpful links that are in the description of the video. If you got any questions or comments, leave them down in the comments section. In the next video, we'll be assembling the joiner. So, as always, I appreciate the support, and I will see you guys next time.